Okay, so okay, we'll see what happens. So we begin and we say that the Medrash relates that Yitzchak and Yishmael contended with each other. They had a debate, Medainim. They had a diyun. Diyun is like a debate when they were young. Yishmael said, let me just make this a little bigger. Oops. Yishmael argued, I am more beloved than you because I circumcised when I was 13 years old. Beloved, I guess, means beloved to God. My active commitment to God is far more beloved, far greater. Yitzchak countered, I am more beloved than you because I circumcised at 8 days. Now, we first have, so let's figure out which before we figure out who we agree with. What's the basic logic? So 13, we understand why that would be beloved. The reason Yishmael, who was circumcised at 13, saw himself as more beloved is easily understood. As the Medrash states, Yishmael boasted, I had the opportunity to object, but I didn't. So we understand. It's a big deal to have a circumcision at 13. You have the ability to object. You don't object. What a beautiful mitzvah. However, we need to understand why Yitzchak claimed that being circumcised at 8 days was a reason to be cherished more. Why is that greater, right? So, before we get to our interpretation, let's see what the commentaries say. Before we get to the Rebbe's interpretation, so the Rebbe quotes the previous commentators. Some commentators, let's see who it is. Yefei Torah. Yefei Torah is a commentary on the Medrash. Some commentators have explained that the virtue of being circumcised at 8 days is the fulfilling of a mitzvah at its prescribed time is preferable, and the time of circumcision is when the child is 8 days old. So when Yishmael said, when Isaac says, I am more beloved because I did the mitzvah at 8 days, it's not about his commitment, it's about that's the proper time to do the mitzvah. But we're not going to get into that right now. I don't want to get too much. First of all, the Rebbe says, before the mitzvah was, when God told Yishmael to give birth, to circumcise himself, Abraham to circumcise himself at 99, that was the right time. Yes, subsequently, it's going to be 8 days. But initially, it was whenever the commandment happened. So that's the brackets. I don't want to get into that right now. The other problem, what's more, it is hard to say that Yitzchak's claim was based on the virtue of fulfilling the mitzvah at its appointed time. After all, fulfilling that requirement involves only a particular dimension of the observance of the mitzvah, the time when it must be fulfilled. How then can that virtue, that Yitzchak's circumcision was fulfilled at its appointed time, be as significant as the virtue of Yishmael's circumcision, which relates to the fulfillment of the mitzvah as a whole, i.e. his willingness to undergo circumcision, even though he could have objected? By what scale could Yitzchak's claim, I am more beloved than you because I was circumcised at 8 days? In other words, what are we saying here? So again, we have the problem. The Medrash says, Yishmael says, I am more beloved, I circumcised at 13. Isaac says, I am more beloved, I circumcised at 8. Yishmael, we understand. The Medrash itself explains the value of circumcising at 13 is you have the ability to protest. You didn't. Beautiful. What's the value of being circumcised at 8 days? So the commentary on the Medrash says, well, because that's the proper time. 8 days. Now, let's say that's the case. That's debatable itself, but let's say that's the case. That's a detail. The time you do the mitzvah is a detail. How could that overweigh what Yishmael says, that my mitzvah is more valuable because I could protest than I didn't? Seemingly, that's much more powerful. So that's the question on that interpretation, and that's going to lead the Rebbe to offer his own interpretation. To appreciate, whoops, what's going on over here? Something's happening. It's so small. Yeah. To appreciate the advantage of Yitzchak's circumcision, we are forced to say that being circumcised at the age of 8 days reflects far more than a particular dimension of the mitzvah, which is the time that it was done in. Instead, it relates to the totality of what circumcision means for a Jew. When a child is circumcised in the 8th day, his circumcision is of a different nature entirely. And we're going to prove it from the sages. Let's skip this part. Okay. Apparently, okay. In other words, what's going to happen? What's happening here is when Maimonides. Okay, we'll read it inside. Why not? This distinction is also reflected in our sage's statements. Shira Shirah. The Medrash says as follows: Adam, the first man, was commanded regarding 7 mitzvot. For Noach was added the prohibition against eating a limb from the living animal. Avraham was commanded regarding circumcision. And Yitzchak inaugurated circumcision while 8 days old. For Yitzchak was the first to be circumcised while 8 days old. That's what the Medrash says. Now, seemingly, we have a problem. You want to introduce when each mitzvah was introduced. If you want to present when each mitzvah was introduced, so introduce circumcision. Say, Abraham introduced circumcision. Why do you say Isaac introduced circumcision at 8 days? When it happens is a detail. So one might ask, why does the Medrash divide the commandment of circumcision into 2 aspects? A, the fundamental commandment given to Abraham, and B, its own inauguration at 8 days through Yitzchak. And why is the fact that one dimension was added because of Yitzchak, that circumcision be carried out when the child is 8 days old, sufficient to refer to him as the one who inaugurated the mitzvah of circumcision? So that leads us to say, apparently, he's being chosen as the first to be circumcised at 8 days, gives Yitzchak a unique status and prominence, one that is equivalent to the dimension granted to Avraham for being circumcised, and thus adding to the mitzvot commanded to Noach and Adam. In other words, doing the mitzvah at 8 days is a completely new thing. It's a new mitzvah. With that in mind, we can see that being circumcised on the 8th day of life adds a new and integral element to the mitzvah of circumcision. So we don't have the answer yet. The answer is going to appear in section 2. But what we do understand is that we cannot say that the idea of the mitzvah of 8 days is just a detail. That the advantage that Isaac is claiming over Yishmael is that you did the mitzvah, but I did it in the proper time. It must be more than that, because the proper time is only a detail. Whereas Isaac is, and Yishmael's advantage, superiority, and Yishmael's advantage is in the mitzvah itself. I did the mitzvah with my own free will. I could have protested and I didn't. So if Isaac is countering that, that must mean that Isaac is saying something, I got the circumcision at 8 days. There's something integral to the idea of what circumcision is, what the covenant with God is, and why, when it happens at 8 days, it is a greater advantage. And like I said, this is not just a story about circumcision, it's really a story about the foundation of all commandments, as we will see, God willing, in the next few moments. We don't need any more introductions. We'll read it inside, and maybe I'll do summaries, but I don't think we need any more introductions. It's pretty straightforward, the answer. See how it goes. You can better understand the above by focusing on the intent of circumcision. In other words, to answer that question, say, what's the purpose of circumcision? Then we'll figure out what the advantage is of having it at 8 days. So what's the circumcision? So the Torah states, my covenant will be in your flesh as an eternal covenant. Circumcision establishes an eternal bond between each Jewish male and God. What circumcision accomplishes can be understood by drawing a comparison to the covenant established between 2 close friends. When friends want to ensure that their friendship will endure, without any fact or situation disturbing it, they strengthen and intensify their connection by establishing a covenant. Probably going to quote Rabbi Shneur Zalman, Alter Rebbe, yes, Likutei Torah. In other words, what is the purpose of a covenant? If I'm your friend and we're friends, what do I need a covenant for? Well, friends, our friendship will continue. We'll live happily ever after. What's the purpose of a covenant? So you make a covenant because I'm your friend now, but tomorrow we may drift apart. So the covenant is here to ensure that we should never drift apart. That despite any external circumstances, we should still be committed to each other. And that's what the Jew is doing. That's what the covenant of the circumcision represents, the bond with God. That is a covenant that is despite any circumstances. Despite any external circumstances, we're still connected. Okay. Now, nevertheless, when a covenant is established between 2 people, since they are created beings and therefore subject to change, it is possible that the covenant will be broken. When, by contrast, God establishes a covenant with the Jew, through the Jew being circumcised, the covenant is eternal. It is not subject to change. That's, in fact, what the verse says. We quoted the verse earlier. The verse says that my covenant will be in your flesh as an eternal covenant. When I make a covenant with another person, we're human, but the covenant may not be forever. But when God makes a covenant with the Jew, it's eternal. Okay. This is one of the reasons why Avraham did not circumcise himself until God commanded him, although he observed the entire Torah before it was given. This is actually a very interesting concept. The sages say that Abraham kept the whole Torah before it was given. So he had insight to it. He knew what the Torah was going to be. He kept everything. Now the question is, circumcision. He should have known that circumcision is of value. He should have circumcised himself. Why did he wait until 99 when God commanded him to do so? Assuming, accepting this medrash at face value, that Abraham kept all the rest of the parts of the Torah. So one of the answers are as follows. Abraham waited until God commanded him to perform the mitzvah because a created being cannot bring about an eternal covenant, since he and any covenant he establishes is subject to change. A bond that is everlasting can only be accomplished through the unlimited power of the Creator, he who declares and thereby empowers that my covenant will be an eternal covenant. So this is absolutely fascinating. Every other mitzvah Abraham could do. Why not? You do it. What's the problem? What's the downside? Even if you were not commanded, there's no downside. The problem with circumcision is you can only do it once. Once you do it, you can't do it again. Okay. So if you're going to do it before God commands you to do it, it's not really a covenant. Because the purpose of the circumcision is to have an everlasting covenant. A created being cannot create anything everlasting. To create an everlasting bond to God, it has to be done through the power of Hashem, through the power of God. Only God who's everlasting can make an everlasting bond. So I can't do it on my own. So I have to wait for God to command me, because the commandment is an empowerment. So that's why Abraham himself does not do the circumcision until God commands him to do so. So where are we at so far? Trying to build the answer. We say, we want to understand the value of circumcision at 8 days. What is circumcision? Circumcision represents the eternal bond. Eternal bond must be created by God. The human being cannot create an eternal bond. If I make a covenant with somebody else, either covenant of marriage or any form of covenant, it's not eternal. I try my best, but ultimately the covenant could be broken. But when God says we're doing something as an eternal bond, then God makes it eternal, and God empowers us to make it eternal. Wonderful. Therefore, Abraham himself cannot do the circumcision. It has to only be in response to the divine commandment, as opposed to all the other mitzvot he can keep. Why not? There's no downside. You want to do a mitzvah. It's all good. Now we're going back to the question of what is the advantage of 8 days in this equation. So we're going to read section 3. Only now can we understand why the timing of the brit, of the circumcision, is when an infant is at the tender age of 8 days. At that age, the child about to be circumcised is certainly too young to do anything by his own power, to actively participate in the performance of the mitzvah. In other words, when you have a child is 8 days, obviously you're not saying the child who's 8 days old is achieving the covenant, is creating the covenant. That the covenant does not come from the child. When a person hopes to achieve something with his own power, he needs to prepare over time until he is ready and able to accomplish that goal. In contrast, the covenant that is established through the mitzvah of circumcision is brought about entirely by the Creator. Man plays no role in bringing it about. True, the actual deed of the mitzvah is performed by man. You need to have the father or the mohel, the person doing the circumcision. The covenant that is achieved by the act is brought about entirely. So the act, the human being does the act, but the covenant is achieved by that act that is brought about entirely by God. In other words, it is not that man bonds himself to God through fulfillment of the mitzvah of circumcision. The opposite is true. When a Jew is circumcised, that act opens the door to God bonding the Jew to him with an eternal covenant. So this is very interesting. You're doing a mitzvah. There's 2 ways to look at the mitzvah. One way to do it is when I do this act, I connect myself to God. But who's creating the bond? The human being. I do the mitzvah. I create the bond. We're saying that cannot be done because you cannot create an eternal bond. No creation can do anything that's eternal. The verse says the circumcision is eternal bond. So how do we look at it? We look at it very differently. What we're saying is When I do the action, when the human being does the action, we're opening up the space for God's covenant to take effect. But who creates the covenant? I'm opening the door, so to speak. I'm opening up the door to God's covenant, but God is the one who creates the covenant. And that's why it's eternal, and that's everlasting. Now we can understand why there is no reason to wait for the child to be old enough to willingly and actively participate in the observance of this mitzvah. Simply put, the bond established with circumcision is not his own accomplishment at all. That's why at the very first opportunity, as soon as the child is strong enough to undergo the procedure, he is circumcised. Okay, what's the problem? Wait for the child to get a little older, maybe the bar mitzvah, wait for the child to understand what God is and what a connection to God is, and wonderful. And then you do the circumcision. We say no. The child is not creating the bond. The human being doesn't create the bond. The bond is created through God. What we do is we sort of enable God to enter and act. So when do you do that? As early as possible. But we don't need the human participation because we think that the human being is the one who creates the bond. No, the bond is created by God. Now we're going to go back to Isaac. Well, we'll contrast Abraham and Isaac for a moment. On this basis, we can appreciate the uniqueness of Yitzchak being the first to be circumcised when 8 days old, and the advantage of a circumcision over that of Abraham and Yishmael. Remember, we started out saying with the debate between Yishmael and Isaac, of which one was greater. But then we also brought the Medrash that we said that Abraham introduced circumcision and Isaac introduced circumcision at 8 days. And we understood that to mean that Isaac's circumcision is very different than Abraham's. So let's see what that means. Let's see how we spell this out. Abraham was given the mitzvah of circumcision only after preparing himself to serving God over the course of 99 years of his life. Throughout all this time, he followed an orderly progression, beginning with when he recognized his creator at the age of 3, and proceeding through a series of stages that the recognition was intensified at 40 and at 48. These references there's a contradiction in different sources in the Medrash. One place it says that Abraham recognized God at 3. Other places say, Maimonides quotes the Medrash, it says 40. Other people say 48. So to synthesize these three Medrashim, the Rebbe always said that it means there's a stage, there's a progression. He begins asking the questions at 3. 40, when a person reaches the full maturity, he gets to a deep recognition, and then it expands to 48. In any case, Abraham is progressing through his own effort and through his own growing and development. Throughout this time, Abraham carried out his life's work of making God's presence known to mankind. Ultimately, he reached the highest degree of perfection possible for a created being. That's represents with 99. 100 is a complete number. 99 is like as much as we can do to reach as close to perfection as possible. Only after accomplishing all this was Abraham given from above the mitzvah of circumcision, through which he became perfect. I don't know if perfect is the right translation. Tamim is complete. Let's see how I say tamim. Tamim is complete. In other words, Abraham reaches this completion. Abraham does whatever he could through his own effort. He discovers God on his own. He advances in his understanding of God. He keeps developing himself and his surroundings spiritually. And at the end of that journey, you get to circumcision, which is once you do everything you could do, then God will lead you to being wholesome and complete, even beyond what you could do on your own. So that's the model of Abraham's relationship with God, which is predicated on a person's own involvement and effort. Because of all of Abraham's accomplishments, it was not immediately evident that the covenant and connection with God established through Abraham's circumcision came entirely from above. But this is the catch. Because Abraham accomplished so much on his own, so that you may think that Abraham's connection to God is predicated on his own effort. It doesn't happen through God, it happens by his own effort. In truth, even for Abraham, his divine service was not the cause or reason for the circumcision, since, as explained above, the covenant established through circumcision is eternal, and forging such a timeless bond is not within the power of a created being, even one of Abraham's stature. In other words, nobody could make something that's eternal, even Abraham. As Rambam teaches, Maimonides teaches, everything that is brought into being will ultimately cease to be. A creation cannot do anything that is eternal. This teaches us that a created being cannot achieve such eternity by virtue of his own power and achievements. Even a person who is truly great, who fully and clearly understands the mitzvah, is no closer to creating such a bond than one who is genuinely small and completely lacking in understanding. The connection and bond that the mitzvah does is not dependent on how we understand it, because we are not the ones creating it. And therefore, even Abraham's circumcision, yes, he got it at 99 after all his achievements, but even that bond happens through Hashem. But the point is, and all of Avram's service is only a preparation. Avram's divine service then was merely a preparation for the covenant with God. After he carried out his divine service in such a flawless manner, achieving everything a created being can accomplish despite his limitations, God granted him a gift from above, an eternal covenant. Now we're going to add one more detail, and that is sometimes there's a relationship between, sometimes a person earns something get something because they earned it. So if I work for you, you pay me. If I invest, you give me the profit. Fine. Then there's another relationship where I do something, and yet what you're giving me is not because of what I did it, because it's not commensurate to what I did. It's not relative to what I did. You give me much more. For example, there's a Talmudic statement that says that if a person if I wouldn't make you happy, you would never give me a gift. Now, what does that mean? When you gave me the gift, did you give it to me because of you or because of what I did? So a gift means you didn't have to give it to me. Even though I did something good for you, even though I made you happy, I didn't do enough to earn it, right? I made you happy. I said, good morning. I smiled to you. So you give me a gift. Yeah, but the gift is much more than what I did. So who triggered this gift? So the relationship is funny. On one hand, the gift is not because of what I did, because I didn't earn it. I didn't work for you. I just did something small that made you happy, and then triggers your generosity, and then you give me the gift. So the point here is that's what's happening here. On one hand, we say, yes, Abraham's service initiates the commandment to circumcise. In other words, once he does everything he can, then God gives him, in other words, to grow, then God gives him the commandment of circumcision. But when God gives him the commandment of circumcision, it's not because of what he did, it's because it's a gift from above. This is true even for Abraham. And then we'll close the point in a minute in the next paragraph. So let's read. The relationship between Abraham's divine service and the covenant of circumcision is reflected in the Talmudic adage, had the recipient not granted satisfaction for the giver would not have granted him a gift. In other words, that the recipient does something to make the giver happy. In no way is the satisfaction the recipient generates a payment for the gift. It certainly does not compel the giver to give the gift, for a gift is motivated by the initiative of the giver. Conversely, however, a gift is given only when and because the recipient generated some form of satisfaction for the giver. So the Abraham trying to and not achieving, refining himself and elevating himself and growing represents the satisfaction that the recipient gives to God, gives to the giver. But then God gives the gift, which is beyond anything Abraham can do. Okay, so really we're saying even with Abraham, the covenant is not created by Abraham. Abraham just prepares for it. Nevertheless, since Abraham's circumcision was preceded by his divine service, that divine service contributed to the fulfillment of the mitzvah, at least to some degree. Indeed, Avram's very performance of the mitzvah of circumcision is associated with his decision that he must circumcise himself. In other words, even the circumcision, Avram had to agree to do it. Same thing with Yishmael. Accordingly, it is not so obvious, nor is it emphasized to a great degree, that the covenant established through Avram's circumcision came solely from above. A similar concept applies with regard to Yishmael, who underwent circumcision at the age of 13, when he had already attained intellectual maturity. Yishmael made an intellectual decision to circumcise himself and enter into a bond with God. It is specifically Yitzchak's circumcision at 8 days that demonstrates that the bond with God established with circumcision is not come about because of the person being circumcised, i.e., by virtue of the input of a created being, but is forged entirely by God. Wow, we finished the entire talk and we finished it early. Okay, so we read it all inside. So you have, I think we read every word here, which is amazing. So you have all the information. You don't need me to bring it to you, but just to summarize. If I had to summarize this, I would basically say there's two models of serving God. Each has an advantage. The first model is the model of Abraham and Yishmael. And that is that what brings you to the circumcision, what brings you to the service of God is your input and your intellectual inquiry. In other words, the bond between God and Abraham and the bond, and to a degree, the bond between God and Yishmael is predicated on their agreeing to this bond. We understand that this is what we want. We're willing to sacrifice to it, the pain of circumcision. And we not knowingly are entering into this covenant with God, which is a beautiful thing. The Medrash doesn't say that it's a bad thing. It's a beautiful thing, both for Abraham and to Yishmael. And that's why when Yishmael says, I am more beloved, there's room for he has a point. There's logic to what he's saying, right? He's saying that there is an advantage to agreeing and entering the relationship with God from one's own free will, from one's own intellectual decision-making process. But nevertheless, what the Medrash is pointing out and what Isaac says is that as a model of relationship with God, this circumcision at 8 days brings to the table and highlights and emphasizes something very profound. And that is that the relationship with God that we create, that the human being creates, the human being should not make the mistake and think that the human being, I create this bond. I create the bond, by the way, through circumcision or through any other mitzvah, really, for that matter. It's just circumcision, it's just heightens, but it's really about all the mitzvot, right? So we're saying that I create it, I did it, I attach myself to God. I can connect myself to God. So we say you really can't do that because you're a created being. You don't have the power, you don't have the ability to create yourself, to connect yourself to infinity. So what is your role? Your role is to open up and open the door, create the action, create the bridge that God will come to you on that bridge. So yes, you're creating the bridge, but who is entering and who is creating the bond with God? It's God is coming to you to create that bond. And this truth, which is true about Abraham as well, this truth is emphasized with Isaac. Because what Isaac is saying is that there's an advantage when the mitzvah is done in a way that there is no illusion that the child who's 8 days old is the one who creates the covenant with God. When I'm 13 and I'm intellectually mature and I enter a relationship with God, you would think that, yes, we're partners, me, God, we do it together. No, you can't do it because you're only limited. The bond must come through God. Only God who's infinite can connect the finite and the infinite. So when it's done to a child who's 8 days, that emphasizes this deeper truth, that there is no more illusion that the person is doing it. It's really an act of God, and therefore it's eternal. And therefore it could connect the infinite with the finite, which is something beyond the capacity of the human being. Only God could do it. So this is true, like I said, it's true about circumcision, but it's true about every mitzvah. When we're doing the mitzvah, what we're doing is we're creating the avenue that will allow God to sanctify us and to connect to us and to create that relationship, which is why people say, well, I don't know, doing the mitzvah doesn't make me feel spiritual. I'll find my own way to connect to God. The fallacy of that argument is you can't create your own way to connect to God. You cannot define it. You cannot create a bridge to the infinite. It's impossible. Yeah, but the mitzvah does it. No, the mitzvah doesn't do it. God does it. The mitzvah allows you to bring God into your life, but God is the one doing it. Only God could decide where he's going to show up. So when I'm doing the mitzvah with my own mature understanding, so I think that we're a partner. I'm doing it, and God's doing it with the circumcision to an 8-day-old child. You understand that the Brit Olam, the covenant, the eternal covenant, is not by virtue of the human being. It's by virtue of the Hashem who does the covenant, and therefore it's eternal. So again, like I said, it's true about circumcision, but it's true about every commandment. That's the story in short, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we read the entire essay, so that's wonderful. Thank you for joining. Go ahead, Vicky.
Well, thank you. It is a beautiful essay and a very powerful logic. I was just thinking because the circumcision, as you said, it's like a totally different category of mitzvot. Once you do it, you only do it once. You don't have another chance, right?
Right.
So let's say that somebody is born into circumstances where he couldn't do the circumcision at 8 days old. So the circumcision mitzvah is already in effect. But the parents don't know or just don't have an opportunity. Let's say in the Soviet Union, they could do it because it was dangerous, it wasn't available. So, and a person does it later in life. So which model is that? Does it make it like
what I would say that the Rebbe doesn't say, I would say you have both advantages.
Both.
With Abraham, one would negate the other because the concept of 8 days was not introduced. But if you're post Isaac, I think that would be my answer. If you're post Isaac and you do circumcision later in life, you are doing both models because you're coming to it from your own understanding. But now we already know what a brit is. We know what a circumcision is from Isaac, right? So we understand before Isaac's days, when there was no precedent for a child being circumcised, then you could make the mistake and think that it's happening by Abraham's decision-making process or by Ishmael's decision-making process. And then you could have a misconstrued notion of what a covenant with God is. But once the concept, like we say, Isaac introduced the concept of being circumcised at 8 days. So now we understand a new model, or we have a deepened model. We understand what a relationship with God means. So now if I do it later in life, then I'm getting both advantages. I'm coming to it for my own free will. And I'm also understand that the covenant is a covenant that happens at 8 days, which means for my own free will, I'm allowing for this covenant that God will create with me. So the short answer is I would say that now you have both. Because with the Rebbe saying, even Abraham had it. It was just not evident. It wasn't clear. But once Isaac introduced the concept, once we know that there's such a concept, so now I would say the person would have both.
But the concept with Isaac was introduced by Abraham, right?
Yes, but we're saying that Abraham is the one who does it. There's no illusion that Isaac creates the covenant. The covenant is with Isaac, between Isaac and God. Covenant between Isaac and God, eternal covenant. Who made it? Did Isaac make it? No, God made it. Now, once we understand that, now we understand that's true about Abraham's circumcision. It's true about Ishmael's circumcision. It's also true about any mitzvah that we do. Right? So it's not just a male thing. We said that the woman doesn't have circumcision. Well, that bond, they don't have the physical expression of it, but the bond is true for everybody. Now, when you do the mitzvah, any mitzvah, it's the same idea. This is a very interesting question. I did the mitzvah. Did I create the bond or did God create the bond? That's an interesting question. Did I create the relationship or when God created the relationship? So what we're saying is you are allowing the circumstances for God to create the relationship, but God has to create the relationship. First of all, to make it eternal, but also philosophically to create to connect the finite to the infinite. It's not something that the finite can do. So what is my action? Oh, my action is the God says, if you do this, I'll show up. So if you tell me, if you open the door, I'll show up. I opened the door. I didn't bring you here. You showed up. I opened the door. Okay, fine. I removed the obstacle. But you may not know that. But when you do it with it, when Isaac is 8 days old, and we say there's an eternal covenant between God and Isaac, now we understand something deep about the nature of the bond. That this is not a bond that a human being could create, it's a bond that God creates. And like I said, and I keep saying, and I keep repeating myself because I think it's true, is that this is true about every mitzvah. Put on tefillin, you eat matzah. It's not that I'm creating the bond with God. It's that I'm allowing God, I'm allowing God to create the bond with me. And when you have a relationship that is sort of imbalanced because we're finite, he's infinite, there's no other way to do it. There's no other way. I cannot say, I think when I play the flute on Tuesday morning, that's when I connect to the infinity. Doesn't work. You have no ability to connect to the infinity. But if you sound the shofar in Rosh Hashanah, then you do connect to the infinity. Why? Oh, because that God is doing. You're not doing it. You're just tuning in, but God is doing it. Okay, fine. And that's true about every mitzvah, like we said.
Thank you very much. Beautiful answer. But did Rebbe ever comment on that scenario with circumcision later?
He did. It could be he did. It could be he did. I'll have to look around. Let me see if I could.
But I like the answer. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful day, everybody.
Rabbi,
yes,
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
Why Ishmael wasn't circumcised when he was young?
Just like Abraham did not circumcise till he was 99. When God told Abraham to circumcise, Abraham was 99 and Yishmael was 13. That's how.
So before that, it was just kind of out of question.
No circumcision. The circumcision was when God commanded.
Got it.
He was 99, he was 13. And then Isaac was born, so it became 8 days old. Actually, the first time when God said to do it, God said, going forward, it's going to be 8 days old. But Yishmael was 8, he was 13.
Okay.
But again, the interesting question is that according to the sages, Abraham knew of the concept, but he couldn't do it because he could do all other mitzvot, but that's the one thing you can't do twice. So you have to wait for God to tell you because otherwise it's just a symbol. You're just doing something as a commemoration. There's no point. It only works when it's a commandment. If it's not a commandment, there's no purpose.
Okay. Got it.
Okay.
Thank
Wonderful
you.
day, everyone. Thank you. Wonderful day.
You too.